Wrestling is I think it's a really unique sport because it's a real, I think it's a real test physically and mentally. And I know other sports are, but I know the combative nature of wrestling, that one-on-one, one-on-one confrontation where you're trying to physically overcome another opponent, and there's a lot of psychological things in there too, and especially when you win and lose, it's those mental factors become really extreme. That it's a really tough sport, and I think that the good thing about wrestling is you can be really good friends with an opponent or teammates that you're trying to beat out for a spot on the team, and I think it's a really kind of a unique fraternity almost, and I think the sport really brings out characteristics, and I think a lot of those characteristics can then be applied off the mat as well. Well, I think the biggest change has been the rules. The rules of wrestling are constantly being changed as far as interpretations, and it's changed a little bit on some of the techniques that are emphasized, and I think that's probably the biggest thing. There are some other things, but I'd say the rule changes because when I started, they had just eliminated what we call folk style wrestling, which is what they do in the U.S., and they changed over to freestyle, which is an Olympic style of wrestling, and the freestyle rules kind of change every few years, and especially after a quadrennial, after the Olympic Games. Western stood out a lot because when I was looking at universities, they had Dr. Glenn Lation was here, who was named the Olympic coach for 1980, and a lot of the good wrestlers were attending Western. So Western had a very strong program. The University of Guelph also had a very strong program. They had a good national coach, Londo Iacobelli, who moved back to the U.S. But they had the top two programs. There were some others. Waterloo was good in the 70s. Lakehead was strong. They still have a good program. But Western attracted me because not only did it have a good program, but it also was solid academically. He was a good coach. He was, um, he really challenged us, and he was, I thought, a strict coach. We appreciated that. We certainly respected that, and certainly him as an individual. He tried to do his best as far as be innovative, kept up to date with current happenings, and certainly he tried to apply science to the sport. And he was intrigued about why the Eastern Bloc countries were doing so well at that time, and was trying to do research on that. So he was a good coach from that perspective, and I was very fortunate that when I came back to Western, he was my graduate supervisor for my master's degree. So I had him as not only a professor and a coach, but also as my master's supervisor, and he was my master coach, and I was his apprentice coach for the coaching stream in the graduate program. So I got to know him quite well, and know, I was really fortunate to gain a lot of insight from him. Sure. Well, for example, physiological testing. This is when we were just breaking in, and there was some breaking in on the international scene, and so we would do a lot of tests, physical tests, whether it's simple running tests, strength tests, and then a little more scientific. Blood lactate or muscle biopsies, VO2 maxes, those kinds of things. And I certainly remember one instance where we were training for the 1978 World Championships in Mexico City, where the altitude is higher there. We had our training camp in Banff. Actually, it was a ski resort called Sunshine Village, and we did training up there because the altitude was higher, and his theory was if we trained up there that we would become more accustomed to the altitude and therefore be able to sustain the conditions in Mexico, which made sense and certainly is good science. But we found it very challenging, especially when he made us run up a ski hill, and we ended up more or less crawling up it rather than running, but that was the point of it. Yeah, the Olympics is, it's quite an experience. It's a real spectacle. I found that, it's not just the athletic event, but the environment around it and the excitement. When I first went, the first team I made was 1976. It was in Montreal, and I was still a teenager. I was almost 18 at the time, so I was young and inexperienced. But I tried to take in as much as I could. Very exciting. I recall seeing Olga Corbett in the village, and Nadia Comaneci coming on as a youngster and scoring perfect 10 there. But when I finished my career in 1984 at the Olympics, it was a lot different. I had a different perspective. I was more experienced. I kind of knew what to expect, but the spectacle was still there. It was such a great experience. Yeah, well, I think the environment here was good because Dr. Leishin was here, and he was a national coach, so he had those international expectations, and he wanted the team to pursue national programming. And so there were a number of individuals that were on the national team, and so it wasn't really that extraordinary to compete internationally when you were here at Western. And that just raised the bar for other team members. And I think that Western was a great environment for national team preparation. I really do. I think we had a very strong university program that bridged the gap between the national program and really national team preparation is bought from the universities. It's the Canadian Wrestling Association, Canadian Amateur Wrestling Association, recognizes that the CIS League or the CIAU League formerly is a stepping stone to the national program. So yes, Western was a great place to make the national program.